Well, good morning. We're continuing our summer mini-series exploring how God sustained the Israelites through their tough interim normal in the wilderness as they journeyed from slavery in Egypt to the abundant life God had promised them in Canaan. And we're asking what we can learn from how God sustained them that can help us to maintain hope through our interim normal as we emerge from lockdown but still experience many restrictions. So 2 weeks ago, we looked at God's unchanging character conveyed in his name, I am who I am. And last week, we explored his continual presence and guidance through the pillar of cloud and fire. This week is all about God's provision along the way. But we're going to kick off with a choice of games, both called What Is It? Option 1 was sent out to you ahead of time. Someone was to prepare a dish of food and the rest of the family have to taste it, preferably blindfolded, and try and guess what the ingredients are. Option 2 is an on-screen quiz which will come up in a minute, an extreme close-up of 10 different food items will appear on the screen, and all you have to do is try and work out what the food is. Food 1 will appear and then the answer, and then food 2 will appear and then the answer, and so on. So have a go. So if you're playing the game, there's going to be picture 1 now turning up. What is that? And the answer is, it is ice cream. Picture 2. What is that? Well, it is blue cheese. Picture 3. What is it? And it is bread. Okay, picture 4. What is it? Smoked mackerel. Well, I'll accept mackerel. Or even fish might accept. Picture 5. What is it? And it is, of course, baked beans. Picture 6. What is it? And it is fish fingers. Picture 7. What is that? It is an orange. One of the easier ones, I think. Picture 8. What is it? It's a bit harder. It is apple crumble. Picture 9. What is that? It is Weetabix. And lastly, picture 10. What is it? And the answer, broccoli. So how easy did you find it to guess what the food items or ingredients were? Now you were working with food or ingredients that you had, probably at least, heard of. But the Israelites in the wilderness were given food that was entirely new to them. And so they called it manna, which means, what is it? Erin's going to read the account from Exodus 16.
Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 to 5, 13 to 15, and 31. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim on the 15th day of the second month after they had left Egypt. They came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. There in the desert they all complained to Moses and Aaron and said to them, "We wish that the Lord had killed us in Egypt. There we would at least sit down and eat meat as much as other food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve us all to death." The Lord said to Moses, "Now I am going to cause food to rain down from the sky for all of you. The people must go out every day and gather enough for that day. In this way I can test them to find out if they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to bring in twice as much as usual and prepare it." Verse 13. In the evening a large flock of quails flew in, enough to cover the camp, and in the morning there was dew all around the camp. When the dew evaporated, there was something thin and flaky on the surface of the desert. It was delicate as frost. When the Israelites saw it, they didn't know what it was and asked each other, "What is it?" Moses said to them, "This is the food that the Lord has given you to eat." Verse 31. The people of Israel called the food manna. It was like a small white seed and tasted like thin cakes made with honey.
There's something understandable about the Israelites' complaint. They were hungry, they had no food, and they couldn't see how they could possibly find food in the desert. Most people would worry if they had no food and no way to get food. Of course, they had their flocks and herds, but they probably didn't want to kill those. But their complaints still betrayed a distinct failure to trust God, the God who was visibly ever present with them in a pillar of cloud and fire, who had miraculously freed them from slavery in Egypt, parted the Red Sea so they could cross on dry land, and already at this stage made bitter water sweet for them so that they could drink it. We'll look a bit more at that later in the service. Given all that God had done for them and all he had promised them, they should have had a greater trust that he had not led them into the wilderness to die, but would find a way to meet their needs in this interim normal they were going through. But what about us? Do we worry about the future, or do we choose to trust it to God? The God who provided manna every day to meet the Israelites' basic need in the wilderness is the same God we worship. Since his character does not change, we can rely on him to provide us with everything we need for life and godliness. And that's not just about our physical needs for food, water, clothing, shelter, and warmth. He will provide for all our emotional, spiritual, and interpersonal needs as well. And he will sustain us through whatever tough times we encounter. They may not always feel true, but we need to choose to believe that it is true, especially whenever life gets harder. So do you believe that God will help us through this interim normal of continuing COVID restrictions and bring us safely to an abundant new normal when COVID-19 will finally be under control?
Be bold, be strong. Be bold, be strong, for the Lord your God is with you. Be bold, be strong, for the Lord your God is with you. I am not afraid, I am not dismayed, because I'm walking in faith and victory. I'm walking in faith and victory.
may wish to complete some of the activities posted on our website while I continue to talk. And I have another 4 short readings for us before I carry on. The first 3 occur during the wilderness wanderings, and the last is featured in Moses' summary of those years for the next generation as they stood on the edge of the promised land. So firstly, from Exodus 15, and beginning of verse 22, then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they walked through the desert but found no water. Then they came to a place called Marah, but the water there was so bitter that they could not drink it. That is why it was named Marah. The people complained to Moses and asked, "What are we going to drink?" Moses prayed earnestly to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood which he threw into the water, and the water became fit to drink. And verse 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and there they camped by the water. Then Exodus 17, verses 1 to 7. The whole Israelite community left the desert of Sin, moving from one place to another at the command of the Lord. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there to drink. They complained to Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses answered, "Why are you complaining? Why are you putting the Lord to the test?" But the people were very thirsty and continued to complain to Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Moses prayed earnestly to the Lord and said, "What can I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Take some of the leaders of Israel with you and go on ahead of the people. Take along the stick with which you struck the Nile. I will stand before you on a rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." Moses did so in the presence of the leaders of Israel. The place was named Massah and Meribah because the Israelites complained and put the Lord to the test when they asked, "Is the Lord with us or not?" Third reading from Numbers 21, second half of verse 4 to verse 5. On the way, the people lost their patience and spoke against God and Moses. They complained, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in this desert where there is no food or water? We can't stand any more of this miserable food." And then lastly, as Moses sums up those years for the next generation in Deuteronomy 29, verses 5 to 6. "For 40 years the Lord led you through the desert, and your clothes and sandals never wore out. You did not have bread to eat or wine or beer to drink, but the Lord provided for your needs in order to teach you that He is your God." Let's pray. Father, thank you that you are our God, as you were their God, and we ask you to teach us from their experience, that we might better follow you and honour you in our lives today. For we ask it in Jesus' precious name. Amen. So what can we learn from God's provisions for the Israelites in their interim normal to help us through ours? Well, firstly, we can learn that God provides all that is needed, but not necessarily all that is wanted. The Israelites needed drinkable water, food, clothing and shoes that did not wear out, protection from enemies and wild animals, etc., alongside God's presence and his guidance. And that is what he gave them. But when they craved meat in Exodus 16, which Aaron read to us earlier, although God sent them quails, he sent so many that the Israelites became sick at the sight of them. And when in Numbers 21 they moaned again about the food, we have had enough of this miserable food. When they did that, and once again desired to return to slavery in Egypt, God sent poisonous snakes among them, which caused many of them to die. So in our interim normal, we can't demand from God an easy life, but we can trust that he will supply all our needs, emotional, spiritual, and interpersonal as well as physical. So it is right, for instance, to pray for protection from COVID-19 itself, for ourselves, for our families, and for the communities of which we are a part, though not as an alternative to taking sensible precautions ourselves. And it is right to pray that God will keep us in employment or find new work for us if we do happen to lose our jobs. May not be our dream job, but it is right to ask that we have what we need. It is right to pray that our children will cope with the return to a different way of doing school. It is right to pray that whatever our children's GCSE or A-level results, God will guide them on good paths for their lives. And it is right to pray that everyone will be enriched and sustained in their faith and feel an integral part of the community at Trinity, whether or not they can meet in person or whether or not they will have to continue to access the services online. These are basic needs, and God will supply all our needs. Secondly, we learn that God provides in a variety of different ways. He blew quail in on the wind, but sent manna down miraculously from heaven. Likewise, God supplied their water in different ways. On one occasion there was water, but it was undrinkable. Did God show Moses a natural remedy or perform a miracle through an act of obedience? Well, either could be true. On another occasion there appeared to be no water, but when Moses struck a rock, at God's command, it gushed out. And again, this may have been miraculous, or God may have simply opened Moses' eyes to a geological reality. What would certainly have been a miracle is if, at a later stage, Moses had obeyed God and spoken to the rock to produce water instead of striking it a second time. But clearly, God used different methods at different times to provide water for his people, including sometimes simply leading them to a place where there was an abundance of wells and plenty of water readily available. It doesn't have to be miraculous to be God's provision. It's also clear from those incidents that God did more than simply provide water and food. For he provided in such a way as to teach the people to trust and obey him on a daily basis. To trust and obey him on a daily basis. If they listened to him, they would have water. If they trusted him, they would have daily food. But if they tried to store it up for the next day, failing to trust his future provision, then it simply rotted. Except on the day before the Sabbath, when they were commanded to collect twice as much so that they wouldn't have to work on the Sabbath. And then he didn't plot. See, looking too far ahead can cause unnecessary worry. So maybe one of the lessons that we are to learn in this interim normal is to take each day as it comes and to trust God to provide for the future. To take each day as it comes and to trust God to provide for the future. Fourthly, God provided in a way that endorsed his chosen leader, because God involved that leader powerfully in his daily provisions for his people. This was particularly important because the Israelites were very prone to challenging Moses' leadership through the tough journey in that wilderness. And let me say that can be a disease in churches too. No leader is infallible, of course, which is why we favour a collective leadership as deacons. And even as a collective leadership, we will get things wrong, which is why the final authority in a Baptist church rests with the church members meeting. And the theory is that the more people there are listening for God's voice together, the greater the protection against error. But that is, of course, only true if members are indeed seeking to listen for God's voice and not simply pushing their own agendas. My experience at Trinity is that we generally do that pretty well, but we can't take it for granted. Sadly, there are many Baptist churches where church members' meetings are used as a vehicle for dissent against the leadership rather than discernment alongside the leadership. And there are also those who will chunter away after meetings, refusing to accept decisions that are made because they don't like them. We do well to heed the warnings from the Israelites' wilderness experiences, because it is clear that God does not like an insubordinate spirit that sets itself up against the leaders he has appointed. And that leads us on to the last lesson we need to hear today. You see, the reality is that God's provisions can too easily be taken for granted. God provided for all the Israelites' needs daily. But time and time again, they grumbled and groaned instead of thanking him. Yes, they grumbled against Moses, but really, they were grumbling against God. God had dramatically freed them from slavery in Egypt and was with them constantly. Yet they still asked in Exodus 17:7, "Is the Lord with us or not?" God miraculously provided all the food they needed every day. Yet all they can do in Numbers 21:5 is state, "We can't stand any more of this miserable food." No wonder God was angry with them. Such ingratitude. Yet, are we any different? In this post-lockdown interim world, it's easy to look back and long for what it was like before. Even to long for what it was like during lockdown. You know, one of the common responses to our questionnaire we sent out was the expectation that the interim normal of meeting together would be a lesser experience than digital church. And sometimes that was given as the primary or sole reason for not wanting to come. Now, I understand and I appreciate that perspective, and let's face it, we put that option on the questionnaire. And I understand it partly because things do feel restricted, will feel restricted. And partly because we didn't in the questionnaire present a clear vision of what services could look like under such restrictions, and deliberately because we wanted to hear ideas from you all. And partly because the team has done a good job in producing a good quality digital church. But it is possible to get too comfortable with personal convenience to the detriment of mutual encouragement. Hebrews 10:25 urges us, with good reason, let us not give up the habit of meeting together. Let us not give up the habit of meeting together. Why? Because we need one another in this Christian walk. Church won't feel the same as it did pre-lockdown, but meeting together remains incredibly important for the Christian life, if we can do it. And this interim hybrid church offers us the opportunity to get back into the habit of meeting together and into the expectation of meeting together for those who won't be able to make it. It brings us back to something of being a community together, and that's really important. Now, of course, there are people for whom returning to physical meetings is not safe or does not feel safe, and if that is you, please do not feel pressurized to return. That's not what I'm trying to do. But if you could come back, but won't come back solely because you don't think it will be worth it, I want to urge you to think again, to think more widely than your own personal preferences, and to think with a longer term view than the immediate situation. This interim church is part of the journey that we need to travel together, trusting in God's provision and promised presence, in order to get to the eventual new, abundant normal we long to enjoy as a church, that we will be able to enjoy when COVID-19 is finally and fully under control and restrictions can be lifted. But in the meantime, let us not by then have lost the good habit of meeting together.